Hey everyone, my name is Herschel, and thank you for letting me your attention. Okay, while we examine an operation that fundamentally reshaped the conversation about security, sovereignty, and the law. So, in late June 2010, a fragment of software, later named as Stuxnet, uh, quietly entered the Nanat's uranium enrichment facility in Iran and accomplished that what diplomats and conventional planners had failed to do. So it actually physically degraded nearly thousands of centrifuges without a single missile launch or formal declaration of hostility. And I would just say that that one event cracked open the three long, settled assumptions. The first one is that it shattered the idea that cyberspace is an arena reserved for espionage and data theft. And after nerds, the world learned that a digital artifact, okay, could reach through protected networks and touch physical machineries and produce kinetical consequences. The second assumption is like rooted in the decades of treaty interpretations, what that force meant, bombs, bullets, and blockades. So Stuxnet actually forced jurists to ask whether the UN Charter's prohibition on force could not and should reach invisible instructions traveling at the speed light. And the third and the last in the assumption is like the incident demolished complacency in the critical infrastructure sector. So until 2010, many utilities and process plants regarded malware as a IT nuisance. Like Nanads reclassified it as an extensive business risk that could shatter the turbines, overload the pumps, or we can say cripple logistic chains. So from that moment forward, policymakers, insurances, and engineers found themselves pulled into the same room, and sovereignty discussed left the pages of the academic generals and landed on the desk of the cabinet ministers. So insurance underwrites rewrote policy languages to account for state-linked sabotage, and I would say supply chain auditors added a new non-negotiable line items at that moment. Like, could this component ever be weaponized by the Siemens control were at Nanats? So my objective today is to talk you about step-by-step guide, okay, through the legal debates, ethical puzzles, regulatory frameworks, and economic incentives that have emerged in the wake of the watershed moment. So that actually captures the that was all about the Stuxnet. Okay, so and the historic footnote. So it is the hinge on which modern cybersecurity is sewing. Moving forward to the next slide. Let's go there. And here we'll unpack why the single covert operation continues to steer, lawmaking, regulations, and strategy planning in 15 years after the fact. So the first reason Stuxnet retains center stage is that redefine the meaning of force. Before Nanats, even serious professional tended to place like a cyber incident to three buckets. First, I would say stolen secrets. Second, the corrupted data or short-lived, service outages. And Stuxnet added actually a fourth one, like unprecedented buckets, like physical destructions achieved entirely through the code. The real-world damage that vaulted the cyber operations into the same conceptual tier as a precision airstrike, demanding the attention of strategists and truly lawyers alike, right? The second is the incident. Okay, it actually became a catalyst for a global legal debate, and scholars revisited the foundation text, the UN Charter, the Hash regulations, the Geneva Conventions, to test whether the provisions drafted for the artillery shells and battleship could meaningfully apply to, malicious codes. So within 2 years, this is more than that. First password, free tops. So that was all. And the third one, I would say the accelerator for the critical infrastructure regulations. So energy, water, and transport operators had a long ranked cyber threats below flood, fire, and labor strikes. So NANADS flipped that hierarchy. Regulators wrote a new audit checklists and broad risk communities, damaged segmentation plans, and procedurements officers began asking like vendors for proof of secure design development processes. The fourth is the operation provided a template for strategic realization. Uh, so first Iran, and then we'll talk about others. So, while avoiding overt military responses, invested heavily in its own digital capabilities and employed them in subsequent incidents, like such as a Shaman Viper attack. Okay, and NATO, observing the potential for escalation, clarified that a cyber operation with, sufficient impact could invoke Article 5 collective defenses. So, in other words, Stuxnet actually not only delayed a nuclear program, it, rewrote the deterrence theory. And finally, it established a benchmark for, economic and insurance risk. Let's say Lloyd of London introduced cyber war exclusions and forcing companies to shoulder more residual liability unless they demonstrated the robust industrial security control. And credit rating agencies began incorporating OT securities and measuring into bond assessments for some utilities that single score now influences, borrowing costs more than commodity prices too. So we can just say together these five drivers, redefinition of a force, legal catalyst, regulatory accelerators, the deterrence templates, and the economic benchmark explain why Stuxnet still command the policy bandwidth. Years after the last centrifuge at Nanet's was prepared. So each drivers radiates outwards and touching alliances, doctrines, shareholder, expectations, and even the language of supply chain contracts. So that was all for this. Now moving forward to the next slide, why Stuxnet is important. So from sanctioned impasses to convert the deployment to public discoveries that set the stage for everything that follows. So when I began piecing together the Stuxnet chronology, so what struck me first is like how uh, how a series of unremarkable diplomatic milestones quietly paved the way of a correct technical masterpiece. In Back in 2006, as our official starting point when UN Security Council resolutions 1737 and 1803, quickly followed the 1747 and 1835, which actually tightened the exports of, controls on Iran's nuclear program. So those voted raised the political costs of an airstrike, yet, centrifuges spinning, fueling, and behind the scenes search for alternative that could buy time without lighting up the radar screens over the nets. And by the late 2007, Joint Technical Cell drawing a personnel from Oak Ridge and I would say Idaho National Lab and Israel's unit 8200 had built in a full scale replica. Cascade and a Dimona. So their simulations revealed something and counterintuitive it was actually. And it wasn't a permanent spike in rotor speed that caused the most damage, but the series of a rapid asymmetric oscillations that included the hairline fractures. So, armed with that inside, engineers spent, 2008 assembling in the multi-stage kill chain for, 4 0 days exploits for infiltrations, a stolen digital certificate for maintaining a trust, and payload precise enough to stay dormant until the right PLC signature appeared. And the field of deployment actually began in autumn 2009, according to the later forensic reconstructions. The worm actually breached, arrived not via remote penetration, but through contracted USB drive, a small, plausible, and easily overlooked during the routine maintenance. And internal logs at Nanads soon showed that vibration anomalies. Yet, technicians initially blamed the power fluctuations and swept out the rotors, and unwittingly, reinstalling the compromised hardware. Then actually came back in 2010, the inflation point. Palerius, antivirus analyst, uploaded an odd crash dumped to a public malware exchange, and within 48 hours, the global research lab were dissecting code that references the Siemens S7, and controllers contained multiple 0 days and unprecedented combinations. So the NATO and European officials, convinced. Okay, emergency briefings, and Siemens issue the customer advisories in the record time. And Iran actually at the time, severed what a little internet connectivity exists at internets. Though by then the worm's autonomous routine made that gesture largely symbolic. And by 2010, as you can see here, the International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed to close thousands of centrifuges offline, about 15% of Leonard's Ivan fleets. So, in response to the Irene fast-tracked development of Ivan R2 centrifuges, implicitly acknowledging the diminished confidence in the order design. Okay. Leaked in January 2018, yes, uh, that matchless budget, the embarked on the additional 150 million for strategic cyber defense capabilities, marking the formal birth of Iran's offensive, cyber doctrine. So, what this condensed timeline reveals in this velocity. Okay. At which digital certificate and operations can alter the strategic reality. The sanctions lead to cover the planning, and cover the planning leads to the physical sabotage. And sabotage triggers the doctrine and the budgetary shifts, all within the span of 5 years. So there was expanded strategy timeline that framed the entire Nanaz episode, uh, as we see. Now, moving forward to the next slide, we'll explore how alliances, okay, and ensures the academic institutes reach out during the critical first 2 years. So it's very interesting. So as you can see, in tracing the world's response to this Stuxnet, I like to picture three concentrative ripples. Immediate criticize the management, near-term policy adjustments, and medium-term intellectual consolidations. So the first ripple begins within days of the malware public reveals in the 2010. So NATO's tech legal desk in Brussels issued a flash call to member capitals, and by December the alliance convinced a special workshop in Tallinn. So I've spoken with two particular who recall the mood as a controlled discomfort. No one wanted to declare a new domain of war, but everyone sensed that the traditional playbook was inadequate. So Tallinn workshop seeded what could become and what would become the first edition of the Tallinn manual. So the go-to reference for cyber applications for international laws. The second ripple, I would say, is unfolded in the finance and industry. So just 5 months after disclosure, the G2 finance minister met the Seoul and the first time in the cyber physical risk along and alongside with the sovereign debt, okay, that default and pandemic disruptions, like central bank stress test model were quietly updated at the moment. So simultaneously, the OECD high-level risk forum, normally a venue for discussing earthquake and commodity shocks, revealed that guidelines in 2011 urging the members. So a well-placed worm could ripple into a global market just as much as a submarine mortgage the crisis. The second password is garden. So now let's talk about the Ripple tree, considered knowledge production. Okay, so by the late 2012, more than 16 law reviews and articles has disserted whether the Stuxnet actually crossed the human charter's force threshold or not. And academic conferences, which once separated panels into a technical and legal, began pairing the controlled system engineers with 3D scholars, like forging the interdisciplinary habit that that defines now as a cyber governance disclose. Even the International Atomic Energy Agency jumped in the drafting the guidance that urged the nuclear facilities to segregate their control networks and conduct red team exercises at frequent moments. So I would say insurance froze at that time. Okay, and meanwhile, the private insurance market. At that moment, the market was crashed. Effectively, they hit the pause button, and it frozen completely. And operational technology policies pending actuarial rehabilitations, a move that singled just how far an event had stretched a traditional risk model. So taken together, these three ripples show the Stuxnet resonance was immediately a cross-sectoral and self-reinforcement, what actually began as emergency briefing and become a doctrine, then the regulations, and finally micro expectations. So that was all about the global reaction for first 2 years. Now let's move to the next slide. There we'll talk about the key treaties and the principle at stake. So whenever I talk about this segment, I like to start with a bookshelf holding a 5 volume. So each one is a legal pillar and a success for to reread that. And volume one actually as a UN Charter Article 2 of 4, the grand prohibition on the user of force because Nanad suffered a physical damage, and most commentators, agrees that that the line was actually crossed, and yet the charters offer no glossary for force by the softwares, and leaving us to interpret the intent and effect through the analogy. So, and there was all about the volume one. Now let's talk about the volume two. It is a UN Charter Article 55. It is written that the self-defense clause. Okay, here lies the controversy. So, does sabotage centigrades the amount of the armed attack, thereby granting Iran the right kinetic realization and retaliation? The charter does not quantify necessary scale or casualties, and the Stuxnet actually exposed that ambiguity in neon lights. So, Volume 3 and 4 are Hague Regulations and the Geneva Conventions. So, their framers never imagined the PLC login or zero exploit, yet their language and at any means which can cause harm. So, it's broad enough to encompass the malware that twist mentals. And importantly, they embody the principles of distinction and proportionality, which scholars now apply to code as readily as cruise missiles. So, Volume 5 is the International Law Commissioner's article on the state responsibilities. Article 4 from through 11 explains how the state organs, proxies, and even the loosely controlled group can render a cyber act legally attributable. So Article 8's effective control test suddenly became the yardstick by by which the analysts attempted to connect the Stuxnet's digital footprints to national decision makers. Hovering over this bookshelves is actually a triad of customary law principles. I mean, necessity force as a last resort, and proportionally no greater harm than needed, and sovereignty the cornerstone of territorial involvabilities. So actually what fascinates me is that even after the nets, the international community chose evaluation over revaluation. Rather than draft as entirely a new cyber treaty, most jurists argued that the existing law was elastic enough, and provided we clarify the threshold as attribution standards. That interpretive strategy, I mean, underlies both additional addition of the Tallinn and Tanil manual and continues to guide the alliance of policies today. So there was all for this slide. Now moving for the next slide. Armed attacks threshold debates. Whenever I brief a I mean, broader ministry of on a cyber escalation, I open with a question that the Stuxnet made unavoidable. Uh, when goes digitally, sabotage cross the legal Rubicon and the armed attack? The answer is not merely academic. It is, I mean, determined whether a victim state may be lawfully responded with a missiles rather than malware. So, two intellectual camps have formed, I would just say. So Camp A called them as a gravity school, and argues that the yardstick is a strategic impact and not a body count. And they point to the ICJ oil platforms ruling where the court described an armed attack as a use of force of the most grave form from this view, and actually degrading the nuclear fuel cycle already under the UN sanction, and it is strategically and equivalent to bombing and missile silo. Okay, so therefore, Iran possessed a charter-based right to kinetic self-defense the moment its roots and rotors shattered. And Camp B, the I would say the scalpel school counters that the scale and the reversibility matters. And yes, thousands of centrifuges failed, but the cascade was neither destroyed nor rendered permanently incorporeable, and no radiation was leaked at the moment. No workers were harmed, and Iran replaced the machines within a year. So they invoked the ICJ nuclear weapons advisory opinion, which emphasizes the context, I mean, scale and the effects of the force. So under this logic, I would just say that Stuxnet's what was actually an unlawful use of a force, but still fell below the armed attack threshold. Iran's lawful responses were non-forcible and sanctioned legal claims propagated that the cyber operation. So the lack of, I would say, consequences and the real behavior suggests that the front accepted the conservative readings instead of launching the missiles, and it turned to a digital reprisals. So Shamon against Saudi Arabia and Saudi Aramco Operation Abail. Okay, against the US banks, most designed to impose the costs of, while preserving the deniability that restrained, and whether the strategic doctrine quietly endorsed the lower threshold and has since influenced how analysts score later the incidents like Sony Pictures 2014, they were breached, NotPetya 2017, or Colonel Pipe disruptions in Canada. So the lack of, I would just say, consciousness is more than a law school debate. And without the shared metric, every destructive cyber incident risk either overreaction escalating to kinetic reprisal or underreaction eroding the deterrence. So several delegations at the UN have proposed an annex or interpretable guide that would specify the intensity factor for the cyber harm, scope, duration, and physical damage thresholds. So progress is slow, but the proposal itself is a direct offspring of the unresolved Stuxnet debate. Now it's time for the first question. Like as Professor mentioned, evaluate whether the cyber operation constitutes use of force or armed attack, and apply the principle of proportionality and necessity. So in that case, I would just say uh, here the light of a verdict, professor asked, like Talent Manual 1.1 and Rule 11 says that a cyber attack is a use of force when its effect resembles the kinetic weapons. Stuxnet physically ruined about thousands of centipedes to its clearly passes that threshold. And whether it climbs to an armed attack, the Article 51 triggers is less certain. So, in Narcagua versus United States, the ICC reserved that the label for the most grave uses of the force, and Stuxnet actually caused no casualties, and that's resumed work within the years. So, by the Nicaragua scale, it is hovers just below armed attack, given Iran a legal ground for the countermeasures, but not over military self-defenses. And now the necessity is like force must be a last resort sanction. Diplomacy was settled in 2010, but no neutral body confirmed peacefully options were exhausted. So necessity remains consolidatable, and proportionally asked whether expected to gain the overweights collateral harm, and targeting the sanctioned military hardware without even like a civilian deaths are scored well, and yet the warm world while the spread trimmed that margin far away. And finally, the sovereignty tallying 2-4 and Rule 4 states any cyber operation causing an effect on another state's territory without consent breaches sovereignty outright. On that court, actually, Stuxnet fails. Third password, farming. So that was all about the fault between the gravity and the scalpel interpretation of armed attack. And the question is also answered already. So moving forward to the next slide, we'll tackle the equally thorny obstacle. I mean, how do you hold accountability when the attribution itself is a forensic tightrope? So, sorry. In the armed attack debate, I would say is a headline challenge. Attribution is the file print that makes the enforcement possible or impossible. So here's the central dilemma I put policymakers. Even if we are agreed tomorrow that the sabotaging centrifuges is an armed attack, what could qualify that evidence that could prove who did it? And digital artifacts are frustrating plastic. Okay, IP addresses can be spoofed, stolen certificates can be changed, and the code fragments recycled to frame an innocent third party. So that is the case. So an international law does not provide a yardstick artificial and Article 8 of the ILC state responsibility articles says that a state liable for act of individual is a direct and a control, but the demonstrating the effective control through the lines of obstacle code is radically different from the exercise from the matching shell case into a weapon cache. Intelligence service might possess classified signals, and yet they are loath to reveal the sources, and the method is open to diplomatic firms. and the result is accountability gap wide open enough to drive the policy and the paralysis uh, throughout the course. So, because no government has publicly accepted the responsibility for Stuxnet, Iran lacked the evidences, immunications, and to bring the case before the international court, justifications and justice. So, what fixes are on the tables? It's a huge question. So, one proposal is the UN mandate attribute councils, a standing panel of a digital forensics and international law experts who would review the sensitive evidence under the strict confidentiality rules, then issued, finding status can be rely on the diplomatically. Complementary idea is a global evidence score systems. When investigators capture the malware samples or log files, the data are cryptographic sealed and a timestamped, preserving change of custody or eventually a legal political scrutiny. And the next, skeptics worries about the politicians, and uh, I would just say yet the alternatives are already problematic. Current stopgaps include the bilateral cyber hotlines like the one between the Washington and the Moscow established in 2021. Okay, there was a completely different case, and the OSCE transparency was that allow the voluntarily inspections of a critical facilities help as a confidence builders, and these mechanisms still fall short, and assigning the blame of levying the penalties and all sort of things. So that actually outlines the uh, evidentiary, the whole, and the other undercuts, deterrence, and the accountability. So now let's move forward to the next slide. We'll explore how how the international, community has tried to patch that hole with the soft law norms. So as you can see, if hard law has been slow to mature, soft law has sprinted ahead. And sometimes out of sheer necessity, picture 2030, Stuxnet is still fresh. And yet, the diplomats know the multilateral treaty will take years. And into that vacuum steps the United Nations group of government experts, the GGE, we can say, in two successive consensus report 2013 and 2014, the GGE crystallized that three core norms. The first is existing the international law does apply in the cyberspace. Second states that they have the duty not to knowing allow their territory to become a launch pad for malicious operations. And the third and the last one is a critical civilian infrastructure that deserves special protection during the peacetime. So, although those reports are non-binding, they carry the full weights of consensus from the states and the drivers as China, Russia, the United States, and Kenya. The General Assembly endorsed them without a vote, effectively mm, giving them a non-political if the juridical standings if is there. So building on that start, the open-ended working group launched in 2019. Okay, it drafted the frameworks as like a practically plumbing 24/7 hotline mechanism, shared forensic problems and protocols and capacity to, building commitments for states linking measure certs. And in parallel, the OSCE adopted 16 cyber confidence, building measures from the public directories of national point of contact to voluntary on-site visits at critical facilities. So these CBMs may sound procedural, but they function like pressure relief valves and allowing state to clarify the intent before the misunderstanding spirals. So adoption data underlines the impact. About the 65% of UN members now reference as the GGE norms in their national cyber strategies, and more than the 40 reports. using OSCE style contacted list is okay. So soft laws, in other words, is already shaping state behavioral. I mean, perceiving the the context, and because it is easier to sign that uh, to rectify a treaty. So that these slide captures how voluntary norms have become a practical guardrails in the absence of the formal treaties. Now, moving forward to the next slide, we will shift our rulemaking to moral reasoning, evaluating the stacks through from distinct ethical lenses. So legal analysis tells us what we may do, and ethical analysis asks what we ought to do. So I frame Stuxnet ethical framework and footprint along with four axes. Axis one is discrimination. The proponent argue that that actually Wamba sanctioned military nuclear nuclear facility, thereby satisfying the principle of the distinctions. The second axis I suggest is a proportionality, and like supporters claim the operations delayed the prolifications, okay, without a single consultee, and comparing the favorably by the airstrike that might have to ignite the regional war. So I would just say it's an extremity measure, not in the body counts, but in the systematic exposure. The third is sovereignty, and I would just say that even absent casualties, penetrating others' states' critical infrastructure without consent breaches. The Verafilin norm is just disgusting. The ethical question, becomes of whether a preventing nuclear breakout just is comprising the very principle that underpins peacefully coexistence. And the fourth one is precedent. So by providing that digital sabotage can achieve strategic objectives, and Stuxnet may have lowered the global threshold for its use. So Iran's subsequent Shamoon attack and Russia's deployment of NotPetya both cite the NATS and intelligence assessment as a conceptual inspiration. So to mitigate these, risks, countries like France, Australia have piloted the Article 36 at the moment. Article 36, it says that the styles cyber weapon reviews. The idea is pretty simple. Okay, so before deploying the code, is subjected to multidisciplinary plan that assesses the legality, collateral risk modeling, and escalation probabilities. So such a pre-deployment ethics and reviews could become best practices and ensure the decision makers face the moral as well as tactical questions. So that was all for this slide. Now moving forward to the next slide, we'll translate these ethical okay frameworks into concentrated engineering and the governance standards. So as you can see over here, so if ethics applies the why, industrial standards provide the how. Okay, the most influential is ISAI I6624443, as you can see over here. Seven-part framework that touches everything from the corporate governance to embedded device hardening. So pre-2010 adoption was limited, and post-Stuxnet, 36 countries bake actually 62443 clauses into public procurement. And utilities like EDF and France and Saudi Amaron and the Gulf require the vendor to demonstrate the compliance before any bid. Okay, any bid proceeds to pricing. So, complementing that ISO 27019 tailors the cybersecurity controls, specifically for the energy sector, emphasizing the physical digital convergence, rigorous batches, management cycles, and the supply vetting procedures. The European network of transmission system actually operates the reference 27019 and its grid code auctions, effectively turning the standards into a market passport. But I would just say that like standard matter only when violations deal. Okay. And enter the regulations. Portuguese electricity operators REN paid a 14 million of fine in 2022 for OT segmentation failures. So Europe's first major penalty under a critical infrastructure law. The case now appeals in a broad packet across the continent as cautionary tale. Compliance is cheaper than the remediation. And collectively, these frameworks, shift industrial cybersecurity from a best effort to contractual and regulatory obligations. And they form the lesson from the NANATs into line items on bill of material and maintenance of schedules and board level dashboard, making it far harder for any of the modern Stuxnet clone to find an unprotectable foothold. So that was all about this slide. Now we'll talk about our next slide. Okay, regional and national regulations. So when I brief private sector, okay, I remind that a cyber law no longer lives solely in the Geneva and New York. So it now appears in domestic statute books that carry a very real fines. Europe providers the clearest illustration, I would say. The original Network Information Security Directive 2016 actually introduced that the baseline security and 72-hour breach reporting for operators of essential services. Its successor, NIS 2, in the force this year actually widens the net to include the space, waste management, and public telecoms, and it raises fines to 2% of the global turnovers. And if the turnover is 5 billion, then it is 100 million ceiling, and numbers that get the CFO's attention actually. So Europe's finance sector faces additional layer, the Digital Operation Resilience Act. Okay, so DORA mandates strict stress testing and gives the supervisors the power to ban the high risk, third providers, cloud vendors are securely and squarely in the regulators of line of sight. And across the Atlantic, the United States updated the Presidential Policy Directive 20, and it embedded mandatory inter-agency legal scrub for any offensive cyber operation. Domestically, the cyber incident reporting for critical infrastructure at 2022, which it actually sets the strict clocks of 72 hours from the discovery, 24 hours from the ransom payment to report the incident to the CIS. The Department of Justice can be also subpoena alerted to the timeline is more than a guidance. Okay, so it is enforceable process. And at that moment, Canada is close behind with Bill C-26, which will grant minister powers to issue the compulsory cyber risk directives to telecoms and energy operators, supported by the administrative penalties that ratchet upwards with each day of non-compliances. Okay, so the United States, post-Brexit, but hardly isolated, has transported the NIS into a national law and layered on the Protective Security Telecommunication Infrastructure Act 2022. PSTI enforces baseline security for connected devices. Yes, and even the humble smart thermostat closing a gap Stuxnet exposed, an attacker needs only the weakest not to pivot into high value control systems. So in short, I would just say like the legislative MOESC is no longer the future aspirations. It is today's compliance landscapings. Okay, so if you, I mean, operate the cross-border plans, you know the juggles at least four, I mean, statutory clocks and three of fine regimes, all inspired directly and indirectly by the Nanats wake-up calls. So that was all for this slide, and I will talk about the Middle East. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, there we go. So the Middle East actually offers a fascinating study and a divergent, okay, yet the convergent legal evolutions. So on one side, Israel's draft cyber directives law, I mean, aims to centralize the authority over the critical infrastructure protection, and the bill empowers the regulators to conduct unannounced audits, issue binding directives, and even seize the control of the system during the extreme crisis. So, parliamentary debates focus on the judicial oversights and data privacy safeguards. But the political momentum is strong. Every parties remember what happened at Nanas and the recently what could happen to the to I would just say desalination plants along with the Mediterranean coast. Okay, so across the Gulf Corporation Council took on a regional rather than a national approach. So in 2017, okay, energy minister signed a momentum establishment of a joint gas and oil CERD. So the CERD actually runs an annual live fire drill and a Gulf Shield that simulates the wipe malware inside the refinery and test actually the cross-border information sharing under the 4-hour time frame. And while the GCC is often portrayed as economical driven, the cyber framework actually shows the quiet but the growing security considerations. Smaller and smaller states like moving to at this point of time, the United Arab Emirates incorporated IEC 62443 into its energy regulations code, while Saudi Arabia National Cybersecurity Authority issues binding cloud security controls, which recognize that the supply chain platforms are critical as a premise as SCADA. So these regional statutes and frameworks prove that the Stuxnet normative rebels is not confined to Western capitals. It shapes the legal doctrine even among state with differing strategies and agendas. And each government is in fact writing its own never again clause into a national, I mean, laws of their own. So there was all about the Middle East legal procedures and post Stuxnet. Now, moving forward to the next slide, I will examine how a military doctrine worldwide have absorbed these lessons into operation playbooks. So, legal texts create obligations, and military doctrines translate them into action. The United States puts its marker down with the defend forward. Okay, so the doctrine's core idea is that waiting for a malware to cross your perimeters is a losing game. Okay, so Cyber Command now conducts hunt forward missions, like a defensive operations inside a partner's national network to uproot the threats before they land the stateside. So I have heard the commanders describe it as forward to, I mean, deploy the law enforcement, a concept unimaginable before the Stuxnet actually showed what late detection could cost the company or the state. So, United Kingdom's followed with its National Cyber Force in 2020 merged with GCHQ Intelligence with the Ministry of Defense Planning. So, policy papers cite that the Tallinn manual when outlining the threshold for the countermeasures, the confirming that the legal scholarship is now embedded directly into the rules of engagement. And France Lloyd program in Militaria 2019 authorized that action numérique de lutte information offensive. So in plain English, we can say pre-emptive disruption of a foreign critical infrastructure when French national interests at the serious risks. Okay, so the classified annex reportedly included the proportionality tables, modified the table model on the Nanette sabotage profile. And in Asia, Singapore Digital Defense Pillars rebranded cyberspace as the sixth column of its the total defense framework. So that pillar actually stands on the three legs: public sector SIRS, private sector fusion cells, and national digital literacy campaigns. So the idea is to make every citizen a a human firewall, and reducing the social engineering attack surface that often, precedes the technical compromises. And even the traditional neutral countries are recalibrating. Switzerland back in 2022 Armed Forces Cybersecurity Strategy experts reserve the right to conduct, okay, the countermeasure of equivalent effect. Signaling a preparedness to match a sabotage with a sabotage it requires. So, what ties these doctrines and recognize that Stuxnet was not one of the curiosity but the proof of concept. So, the world's armed forces have embraced the lesson digital operations must be integrated, legally vetted, and when it's feasible, executed well left off. Boom. So that was all for the doctrines and the military regiments. Now let's move forward to the next slide. There, we'll see the finance architecture that pays for the resilience or the penalties. Okay, so if doctrine answers how we fight, finance answers who pays. Okay, it's pretty simple that way. So in 2021, Lloyd of London issued the bulletin Y5258 requiring all the standalone cyber policies to, exclude the state actor incident unless they're specifically endorsed. So endorsement come with higher premiums and rigorous underwriting questionnaires that may map directly into the ISA 62443 controllers. So it is like essentially Lloyd used a market lever to push the industry operations towards the best practices. Security without writing a single line of legislations. So public equity actually market followed. The U.S. SEC cybersecurity, cyber risk disclosure rules now are compatible, and companies to file an 8K within four business days. And if the cyber incident is materialistic, the rules are forced to describe their oversight structures. No more hiding cybersecurity responsibilities are clear below the CIO. So I advise directors that actually failing to maintain a cyber risk committee is now I mean tantamount to ignoring the audits and I would say remuneration of the duties. And the banking sector actually faces Basel committees. Pressure with operation risk amendments. Bank must model that catastrophic cyber scenarios. Things settlements, system sabotage that shutters the ADM nationwide, and hold additional capital buffers. So stress test tablets are included in an style industry disruptions because refinery shutdown can reset the the commodity markets and I would say bond spreads and ultimately bank balance sheets. And credit rating agencies bring the hammer down last. Moody's OT cyber score evaluates the segmentation patch, okay, cadence and incident response maturity. A low score can cost a utility tens of millions in annual interest expenses. So I've sat in a discussion where a single falling grade catalyzed a board of a decision to accelerate a multi-year security upgrade budget into a single fiction cycle, market discipline network. So, collectively, these levers create a virtuous of pressure loop, and regulation nudges. Boards demand better controls and ensures the lenders reward the compliance with lower premiums and interest rates. So that was all for the insurance and the finance governance. Now let's go to the next slide that will say the oversight structure that actually verifies in real time whether the organizations actually meet the standards they claim. So standards are insurance. Incentive-wise only matters if someone checks the compliance. So in the United States, Cybersecurity and the Infrastructure Security Agency Shield Up initiative has issued six binding directives since 2021, and each targeting the operational technology sector, from the pipeline of water treatment. And I would say these directives mandate this specific control, set audits, deadlines, and crucially carry and enforcement teeth via sector regulators like PHMSA for pipelines or EPA for the water utilities. Now comes the Europe. Okay, Europe operates Cyclone, the cyber criticalism organization network. So it actually, functions like emergency operations center of a 27 member state, synchronizing incident triage, forensic resources, and public mapping. And I had privilege to observe the 2023 Blue Wall exercise, where they simulated the malware hit. It was a broad grid operations, and the drill forced the legal teams to, approve the evidence sharing with the 2 hours and tempo unimaginable pre-Stuxnet. And at the global level, the International Atomic Energy Agency (NSS 33T) guidance now actually makes security controls and licensing prerequisites for nuclear reactors. So, national reactors in Finland and the UAE have already used these guidelines to demand architecture changes before granting the commissioning approvals. So, these structure actually embodies a lesson with actually internalized from the NANAT, and timely oversight can spell the difference between the detectable intrusions and the melted centrifuges. So, continuous monitoring, cross-border drills, and enforceable directive transfer the standard from papers promises into operational realities. Now it's time for question B. Evaluate challenges in enforcing the ethical accountability for covert cyber operation. Okay, so let's talk about that. So, actually, the ethical accountability turns on a three subborn gaps. First attribution, tally into 2.0 broadens the uh, due, actually, the due, we can say the due rule, and yet the states rarely shares the raw forensics without the trusted evidence as course. And moral accusations remains debatable and punishment inconsistent, I would say. The second divergence doctrine is NATO's 2021, and it actually Communic warns that the serious cyber attack may trigger Article 5, while the Europe's cyber diplomacy toolbox freezes the assets of named hackers, and national playbooks vary. Even more, like US defend the forward, and France the LPMs, and Iran's capital offensive states that each define the proportionally and retaliation through different lenses. So uneven threshold create uneven ethics, I would say. The third, civilian spillover. Okay, Uh, Italians 2.0 rule 92 reforms that the protection of a civilian objective yet are not paid here. Stuxnet's a conceptual descendant crippled global shipping and hospitals with no binding reparations. So police papers are responsible state behavior, but victim compensation remains as ad hoc. And NATO and Europe document proposes rapid attribution teams and confidence building drills, but field capacity lacks. So a workplace and a workable fix would match three elements. Uh, UN broke up with the forensic escrow, a neutral arbitration panel, empowered to recommend the restitution, and the ensures the state that fund of that the fund for the unintended civilian harm. So, the bottom line for this is that until the state coverage on the shared attribution mechanism and commits to the compensating literal victims, ethical accountability in the cybersec will stay more aspirational than the operational, even though the doctrine language now exists. So that was all for the question and the oversight and accountability structure. Now let's go to the next slide and talk about the enforcement and the legislation snapshot. So standard doctrines and oversight are only half the stories. Half of the stories. Okay. So the first half is the enforcement evidence that bad actors actually face the consequences. So here's the Stuxnet. Represents the paradox. On the other hand, it exposed the unlawful forces. On the other, okay, uh, the state has actually dared hold another before International Code of Justice for cyber attack. So eventually, the hurdle is actually enormous. I mean, you would need to share the resources, methods, and perhaps even the classified intercepts, and risk the few government will run. So as a result, at the end of the day, the ICJ docket remains empty on the cyber use of force claims, and yet the accountability has not stood still. So I would just say like a United States actually pioneered an approach I call naming and narrowing. The Department of Justice has actually concealed the indictment against Iranian APT-33 operators for the aerospace intrusions and Russian actors behind the Triton safety system compromises. So, critics note that the defendants are unlikely to see the US courtrooms, but the indictments to freeze the assets, restrict the travel, and stigmatize the organization that facilitate that work in anti-money laundering circles being named as half of the penalty. So, Europe has ventured even the further back in 2020. Uh, so in 2020, the European Union devised its first cyber-related sanction, freezing the assets of six GRU officers linked to NotPetya, and explicitly cited the cyber attack against the critical infrastructure. So the Council's legal basis references the same principles we discussed earlier: sovereignty, proportionality, and the state responsibility, signaling that the Europe foreign policy machinery is prepared to operationalize cyber norms. Now let's talk about the civil suit. Civil legislation offers yet another flank, and the Coral Pipeline ransomware incident spawned a derivation of the action in the cash record. So okay, so the shareholder holders actually leaked the director's breach and fiduciary duty by the failing the overseas segmentation of operational technology networks. So, whatever the final judgment, the lawsuit actually already influenced the directors and officer insurances pricing across the energy sectors. So, These fragments actually, indictments, asset freeze, civil suits, regulatory fines from the patch rather than a seamless fabric. But together they raise the cost of malicious cyber behaviors. So in the world where the direct ICJ adjustments remains elusive, such an increment penalties are shaping, incentivized, and more effective than many expected. So that was all for the snapshot. Okay, enforcement and legislation snapshot. Now we'll talk for the next slide, economic and market impact. So if you ever doubt that the cyber risk has gone completely from the mainstream, look no further than the capital expenditures and the insurance ledgers. So back in 2020, I think the global operation technology security markets barely scratch 1 billion US dollars. So this year, it is north of the 24 billion compound annual growth rate of roughly 24%. So Broadcoms are not throwing that money around for sport. They are hedging against the financial rockets and the financial shocks that regulation, insurance, and the rating agencies have made tangibly. And start with insurance after Lloyd Bulletin Wi-Fi 258. Sorry, my bad. It is imposed at the mandatory state actor exclusively, I mean, industrial client, like seeking for the coverage faced a stark choice of created defenses of a self-insurance and the energy portfolios. Saw a premium jump 30 to 50%. So that was for that. The next is the credit rating. Moody's OD Cyberscore can move the utility long-term issuer rating by as much as 3 notches. Okay, and back in 2023, the two European utilities actually suffered exactly the fate after on-site audits revealed the inadequate segmentations and a sluggish, patching cycles. So the downgrade translates into a 40 million euros in extra annual interest payments per issuer again, and a cost structure that forces the action as well. And let's talk about supply chain now. So supply chain actually economics have also shifted. It's economics. The European grid operators and so E now requires a software bill material, an SBOM for any control system components submitted at grid code auctions. And vendors have responded by the allocating the 8 to 12% of R&D budgets to secure by design, and proceed some complain about the margin pleasures. Most widely admitting the SPM would have been reduced surprise cloud cost during the time. So that was all for this slide. Now let's move to the next slide. Here we'll talk about the 6 consolidated lessons we've learned from this. So the lesson one is treaties endure but need the turning. The UN Charter, Hague, and the Geneva frameworks remains the legal backbone, but they require an annex or complementary clarifications, clarifying how to measure the cyber harm intensity. So without such clarity, threshold debate will actually the persist and deterrence will wobble. The second lesson is like a attribution is deterrence keystroke. So the faster and more credibly we can align a responsibility, the less room aggregations have to hide behind the plausible disabilities. And developing the shared forensic standards and the secure evidence repositories and therefore a national security imperative, and not for the technical luxuries. The third is non-stick when tied trade and alliance penalties. So soft laws actually statements gained teeth when reinforced by the trade privileges, alliance commitments or market accesses. So the OSCE, so they are the pre-assured, the partially, and because they influence the export credit ratings and defense corporations. The fourth is domestic lever. Move first, like reporting the clauses and accelerate the compliance faster than the guidelines is. So I would just say that statutory breaches and reporting and insurance clauses often reshape the private sector behaviors more quickly than the multilateral processes. And when the CEO must file a Form 8K or risk the director's liability patching cycle accelerates. The fifth is SPO transparency and issues essential to systematic risk containment. In that, I would just say that SBOM's, tamper evident firmware and vetted channels are now as fundamental as the physical safety valves. Without transparency, a single compromised library can propagate systematic risks across sectors. The third one is capacity building in the global south critical. Okay, so, and that I would just say no one is safe until everyone is safer. So, capacity building in the global south is critical. Otherwise, the poorly secured third country vendor become the soft launch pads for attack or highly regulated economics. And international aid for cyber resilience is there for the enlightened self-interests. And I just say that taken together, all these things that these lessons outlines the holistic frameworks, clarify the law, and invest the attribution attach incentives, and leverage the domestic statutes, secure the supply chains, and raise the global floors, and ignore any of the pillar and the edific wobbles. So that was all about the six consolidated lessons. Now let's move forward to our next slide and the last slide, action plan and closings. So the first step, I would just say, my bad. So it is modeled on Article 36 weapon law reviews. So these boards will evaluate offensive code for legality, collateral risk modeling, and escalation potential before a single packet leaves national infrastructure. So France and Australia have the prototypes. The rest of us should follow the suits. The second is establish the UN attribution clearness. Uh, in that case, I would say the participating states would store the forensic artifacts in encrypted escrow, and a standing billion part of technologists, part jurists could issue the confidence rated finding without exposing raw intelligence, giving diplomats and fault accumulations for propagation responses. The third is harmonized 24 to 72 hours. Okay, so in that case, I would say 24 hours for critical infrastructure events, 74 hours for the all others. And synchronized timelines prevent attackers from forum shopping. Okay, and the shopping that actually gives the source and the fighting chances to undertake the cascading effects as well. The fourth is SPM amendments. So in that case, I would just say that the uh, governments can buy enough industrial careers to move the global markets by actually inserting the security clauses into tender documents. So they create a demand signal vendors cannot ignore. The fifth is institutionalize annual joint drills. Uh, in that case, I would say these exercises should test not just technical containment, but legal authorities criticize the communications playbooks and insurance coverage triggers. all in one integrated scenario. Discovering a procedural gap during the simulation is actually inconvenience discovery, and during the live incident and the catastrophes. So in each of the steps, okay, has a great defense ministries for the weapon reviews, foreign officers for the I mean clearinghouse legislation, for breach notification laws, procedures, agencies for SPMO mandates, and national securities. So Council for Joint Drills, none requires a new treaty. All are actually feasible within existence legal frameworks. So that's our 5 points from the aspiration of to this implementation. So that was actually everything from my side. Thank you so much for taking this long with me, and have a good day.